Good evening. I'm Lauren Leader, CEO of All In Together. Welcome to Women Winning, a celebration of the women of the 117th Congress on the eve of the presidential inauguration. For those of you who don't know us, All In Together is a nonpartisan, nonprofit women's civic education and mobilization organization. Since our founding in 2014, we've trained tens of thousands of women across America to be civic and community leaders, ensuring they have the tools and resources to speak up on behalf of themselves and their communities. In the 2020 election year, we registered and mobilized women voters in critical swing states. We're proud of the role we've played in elevating and increasing civic participation across America. Our mission remains vital as ever. 2020 was a hugely historic year for women in politics, but the chaos of recent events threatened to overshadow these accomplishments. And frankly, they've obscured so much about what does work in our democracy. Tonight, we want to highlight just how historic and groundbreaking this moment is, with a constructive and positive look to the future. In this election, more women voted than ever in the history of our nation. A historic number of women, including 144 representatives, 52 women of color were elected to Congress. And tomorrow, the first female, African-American, Indian-American vice president will take her oath of office. Indeed, when her oath is sworn, the two most powerful seats in our government will be held by women. The women now at the helm of American government are charged with leading at a time of extraordinary division and hugely challenging national crises. We'll hear how they plan to work together to advance progress on behalf of the American people, and we'll learn more about what it takes to get women elected in the first place. We celebrate women's accomplishments, even as we get real about what it takes to lead as women in this uniquely polarized time. We will also hear from some of the women behind the women, the leaders who work to get women elected to high office. We'll hear from newly elected House member Representative Nancy Mace and returning member Representative Sherry Bustos about recent events, their perspective on governing now and in the future. Dana Bash speaks with Senator Debbie Stabenow about her hopes for progress as we try to move forward as a nation. This program has been made possible by our partners at Facebook with support from Bloomberg Government and InterDigital. We are proud that both Facebook and InterDigital also serve on the All In Together board. Thank you for your support in making this special program possible. Thank you also to our presenting partners, 131 and Counting, the LBJ Women's Campaign School, Right Now Women PAC, and South Carolina Women in Leadership. Now it's my great pleasure to speak with Congresswoman Sherry Bustos. The 117th Congress is her fifth term in Congress, representing Illinois' 17th Congressional District. She's a member of House Leadership as co-chair of the Steering and Policy Committee and a member of the Appropriations and Agriculture Committee. In the 2020 election cycle, she served as the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Sherry Bustos. Good evening, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for making time to be with us.
It's good to see you, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I have to begin by asking you about where you were on January 6th during the siege of the Capitol. I mean, it seems like every day we're learning something new and terrifying about that day, and that many members really were in grave danger. Can you just walk us through where you were, where your staff was, and how you've been processing that day and thinking about it?
You know, I think it's interesting that you say every passing day we learn a little bit more. I would say every passing day my emotions evolve a little bit as well. But on that day, on January 6th, 2021, which is now a day that we're going to remember in American history, I was on the House floor. We were doing our work for democracy. Our job that day was to make sure that we certified the Electoral College vote, that the hundreds of, well, let's see, what do we have? 150-ish million people who voted in that election, that we certified the will of the people. And that is what we were there doing on that day. I happened to have been sitting on the House floor. There weren't a lot of members on the House floor because on the Democratic side, and I'm a Democrat that represents this region of Illinois in Congress, we only had 26 members on the House floor. We had some additional members sitting in what's called the gallery, which is typically reserved for the public. But because of COVID, there were some others who were just observing from up there. And that is when it all began to unfold. It was, I can talk you through it a little bit, but how you knew what was going on was kind of a surreal moment in the fact that I had a member of Congress sitting one seat away from me to my left. None of us can sit next to each other because of COVID. And he handed me his cell phone, and it showed these people storming up the Capitol steps, which, keep in mind, the Capitol steps are just outside of the House chamber. And I looked at it and I said, my God, when did this happen? And he said, this is live television. And, so we began to hear noises that, if you can kind of picture, like when you're inside of a room and noises start building and it gets, just a whole lot of commotion. It kept getting louder and louder and louder. And then what was happening on the House floor is Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who had been in front of all of us presiding over this, she was, somebody came up, whispered in her ear, took her off. So, okay, something's going on. Then they took off our majority leader, whisked him away, whisked off our majority whip. They began locking doors. And then finally, a member of the Capitol Police got up to the speaker in front of all of us and said, be prepared to get on the floor, that the Capitol had been breached. And then, believe me, your mind starts going all sorts of places. Their next announcement was, be prepared, get your gas mask from beneath your seat. Be prepared to put that on. And I can tell you, as somebody who, thank God for our combat veterans who are members of Congress who helped us figure out how you open this packaging for a gas mask, how you put that on. And then, again, if you're looking at somewhat of a play-by-play of what happened, we were then, we had to be evacuated and taken to a safe location. And, so a lot of stuff in between, a lot of emotions attached to that, people crying, people yelling, people texting their loved ones, calling, just really a very emotional and scary time for anybody who was in the Capitol at that time.
It's so chilling, and it's terrifying to realize, how close it seems like so many members came to, even more significant danger. And we've been hearing the stories about this, so Congress, obviously following the terrible events of that day, Congress impeached President Trump now for the second time. It's not clear as of tonight what happens next in the Senate, but clearly the reverberations and the consequences of this horrible insurrection will continue to be part of the Congress for a long time. But tomorrow, a new president and vice president will be inaugurated. So how are you thinking about reconciling these things that we clearly have to deal with what's just happened, this very recent and terrible past that we can't just sweep under the rug, but then we also want to begin doing work, and I'm sure you're eager to get to work on behalf of your constituents, with two terrible, the economic crisis and the COVID pandemic. I mean, just the urgency of so many issues. So how are you thinking about how you go forward in this new Congress?
Well, I think it's actually, let's go back to what happened on the 6th. We ended up fulfilling our duties as members of Congress. Democracy prevailed on that day. And so, looking forward to the inauguration, democracy continues to prevail. You've got all these threats that are out there. And we're gonna go through with this inauguration. President-elect Biden will be President Biden. Kamala Harris, this historic figure now, will become the first female and obviously a woman of color to be the vice president of the United States. So democracy prevailed then. We went back into session after this angry, vicious mob wanted to hang Vice President Pence, wanted to assassinate. Speaker Pelosi wanted to kill me and my colleagues, democracy prevailed, and it will continue to prevail. We've got a lot of work to do. You mentioned the pandemic. We've got an economic crisis that has impacted women disproportionately, and so I was very pleased with the fact that now soon here in a day or so, President Biden has already unveiled his Rebuilding America plan. And it's big and it's bold and it's necessary. And so it is time to get to work. It's time to make sure that we continue to have democracy prevail. And it's time to have the American Rescue Plan rolled out and enacted. And we got a lot of work to do just here, especially in these first 100 days, so we can set the tone for the presidency of Joe Biden.
It's exciting to look ahead and to think about, what's possible. Do you worry about the ability to, look, the Democrats have a smaller majority than they've had in some time. As with anything, obviously you were in Congress when the Democrats were in the minority. Now you started, right? The Dems were in the minority when you were first in Congress, now in the majority. But even so, it's a narrow majority in this Congress. How are you thinking about the possibilities for bipartisanship? Because, on the one hand, you would hope that there would be a sort of unification of commitment to helping the American people in this terrible time. On the other hand, you have some extraordinarily deep divisions, particularly some of the members that were involved in, questioning the outcome of the election. So how are you thinking about this? Because I know you've historically been somebody who has worked as much of a bipartisan fashion as possible. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, well, so my own politics, I happen to represent this congressional district that is 7,000 square miles, 14 counties. I am a Democrat, and Donald Trump won this congressional district in 2016 and in 2020, actually by a bigger margin in 2020. So this is a district that if you don't figure out how you're going to work across the aisle, if you don't figure out how you're going to get things done, you don't get elected. And I'm now serving in my 5th term. So I think that's really a message from the people I represent. They're saying, yeah, you know what? You're doing okay. Even Republicans who went into the voting booth over these last 5 elections, they might say, I'm a Republican, but she's all right because she believes in working together. She believes in getting things done. I think actually, Lauren, this narrow majority that House Democrats hold, the actually 50-50 split in the Senate, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, and now Kamala Harris will break any ties if it ends up voting along party lines. I think that helps us govern more in a bipartisan fashion. And so it will be very, very important that we work together. We have to work together. And the American public is crying out for us to work together to get things done. I have high confidence that over these next 2 years, and I hope over the next 4 years, whatever ends up happening in those midterm elections in 2022, I hope that we will realize that it is not okay to just pass things only along party lines and not get the nation's work done. Because you got to listen first, and most people, you realize they don't talk to you along partisan lines. They talk to you along lines of that they are moms and their dads and their brothers and their sisters and their kids. And, they're just human beings who want to do right by their families. And so that is what I take away from so many of my conversations that I have, and then turn that into getting real work done out in Washington, D.C.
It's really apropos that you should say that, because as you know, the mission of All In Together is to train women, regardless of party, regardless of background, on the tools of civic leadership, to motivate and empower them with the resources that they need to make their voices heard to their elected officials. And I know you're very cognizant of the terrible impact that COVID's had, particularly on women who are shouldering so much of the burden with homeschooling, who have been dropping out of the workforce or losing their jobs. The latest jobs report I'm sure you saw, which was so devastating, that all of the job losses in the most recent job report, they're all women. So we're trying to get more women to speak up, to help their representatives understand what they're going through and what they need from Congress and their state electeds to address the issues in their life. So, what are you seeing from your constituents? What are you hoping to be able to do, particularly to help women get back on track? I mean, for this economy to recover, we're going to need a women's economic recovery, maybe more directly than we ever have. So how are you thinking about those issues?
Well, first of all, the good news is that we have more women serving in Congress than we ever have in our history. We now have 144 women serving in Congress. And believe me, so much of how you govern is based on where you have come from, how you have lived your life. And when you have that many women, those of us, I'm a mom of 3 sons. I go back to those early days when, I was a newspaper reporter making $16,500 a year. My husband was a police officer making $17,000 a year. We had to work opposite shifts for us to be able to afford childcare. And I mean, it wasn't just a desire. We wanted to be with our kids and not send them off to childcare for the vast majority of their, their very young lives. But we had to do it out of necessity. And, we would figure out how we could make our own formula, after I was done nursing and, just all of the stuff that we had to do to afford that. So part of the American Rescue Plan that Joe Biden has rolled out that we will be voting on very soon as members of Congress involves affordable childcare.
Yeah.
The reality is
so
that
overdue. Overdue.
Yeah. So we need that. And we've got a plan. Joe Biden announced this to reopen our kindergarten through 8th grade schools. We need that now to do it safely, right? So you got the ventilation system in schools that will have to be refurbished. You've got, dividing stations to make sure that kids are safe and teachers are safe, smaller class sizes. All of that is part of his plan that we will be voting on. And those all impact women. You think about it, if you have little kids at home that can't go to school, how are you going to go to work? How are you going to go to work? So the getting the vaccination out there, 100 million Americans in the first 100 days of the Biden administration, reopening schools, help with childcare, making sure that we address hungry families, extend the moratorium on kicking people out of their homes, but at the same time, making sure that landlords can be paid. But we've got more strength than ever as women because our numbers are bigger than they've ever been in Congress. And we now will have a woman as our vice president who understands these kind of challenges as well. So we are all products of how we were raised, of our gender, all of that. And I think the next couple of years, I hope the next at least 4 years are going to be darn good for women all over this country, because we're going to fight for these policies that will help women get back on their feet, help our small business owners, so many of whom are women. That fastest growing segment of small businesses before the pandemic were women of color. So all of that gets back to good and strong policies that we are going to be rolling out under the new Biden administration.
So just as we wrap up, our next speaker just after you is going to be Representative Nancy Mace, who is just in her second week in Congress. You have seniority. You've been a leader in the House for a number of years. What are you optimistic about in this time? I mean, you've been speaking very optimistically about what you hope you can do for the American people, given this new administration. But what gives you faith in our institutions and in our democracy at this time when I think so many people feel so discouraged? And, we really wanted to have this evening conversation because we wanted people to feel the power of their voice, the power of our democratic system. So what are you optimistic about? What do you want the women and men listening to take away from our conversation?
So again, I think the theme is that democracy prevailed, democracy will prevail. I think we're going to have a tremendous 4 years ahead. And for anybody out there, from my congressional district watching this who didn't vote for me, or anybody who didn't vote for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, that's okay. We live in a democracy, that's okay. But when you govern and you represent, my title and my job description is representative. And, we're going to be there for everybody. And we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to help families get back on track when we get past this deadly pandemic that we're living through. And, this is what we're talking about is we will be there for Americans from every community, rural communities, urban, suburban, no matter what your background. That's the whole idea. And, I know you're talking to Democrats and Republicans as part of this, but the reason that I am a Democrat is because that is what I believe. I believe that you represent everybody and all communities, no matter what your background. And we've got to restore that hope that America is still the place where you go when you want to work hard and make sure that your family has the best opportunities possible to get ahead. And I want to restore that hope again and be a part in restoring that hope.
Well, we're so grateful for your service to the country, Representative Bustos, and for your time tonight. I know that I am leaving this conversation hopeful as ever and confident in the resilience of our nation and grateful for all of the women who have stepped up to serve. So thank you so, so much for being with us.
Now, I so appreciate you having me and appreciate what you're doing.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace is one of the historic number of newly elected Republican women in the 117th Congress. Representing South Carolina's 1st congressional district, she's the first Republican woman ever elected to Congress from South Carolina. She served in the South Carolina State House before stepping up to run. Representative Mace is no stranger to challenges. She was the first woman to graduate from the Citadel. She's also a single mom of 2 young children. Tonight, she speaks with journalist Amna Nawaz of PBS NewsHour. Amna co-moderated the Democratic presidential debate in December of 2019, and we are thrilled to have her with us tonight. Amna, over to you.
Congresswoman Mace, thank you so much for making the time. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So I have to ask you, because you've shared this story publicly before, but I just can't even imagine what you've been through in the space of just a few days. I saw the video you posted on Twitter when you first saw your office and you saw your nameplate and you were laughing and smiling and touching it to make sure that it was real.
Fine. It was an emotional day. It was so emotional. It was just an amazing moment for
And then
the family.
Within a matter of days, the unthinkable happened, and you were sheltering in that office behind a locked door while the Capitol came under attack from supporters of the president. Just walk us through what that day was like.
Yeah, well, that weekend was awesome. And on my social media, I showed my travel and I had my kids, they were hunkered down with their backpacks for school because they brought their computers or textbooks or notebooks, pens and paper, because of COVID-19, they were going to be in DC with me all week. To roam the halls of Congress and hang out in mommy's office and do virtual school. It's gonna be great. I mean, for middle schoolers, that's just awesome and very cool. But by Sunday night, I started off Sunday morning very emotional, saw my office for the first time, shed a few tears, happy tears, of course, very excited. But by the end of the weekend, by that afternoon, just sort of seeing everything going on online and the rhetoric and everything leading up to it. But later in the day that afternoon, I made the decision. I just didn't like, I'd seen a culmination of things over the last couple of days leading up to that. And I didn't feel safe. And I felt very uncomfortable with some of the rhetoric that was being stated, not only from the president, but from other Republicans and then people on social media and everything and the calls we were getting. It made me feel very uncomfortable. And I told my kids Sunday night, I said, hey, I love you guys, but you need to go home. And I put them on the first flight home Monday morning. And thank God my mother's intuition got them home, because I would have been devastated if they had witnessed what I had witnessed. And on Wednesday, we had the joint session for the largely ceremonial process of certifying the Electoral College. That's really what the day was about. And I left the joint session when they had the first objection to Arizona, decided to meet up with my staff. And then we found out that Cannon, which is the building that my office resides in, was evacuated because there was a threat. We later find out there were multiple pipe bombs placed in DC. There was a cooler full of Molotov cocktails found as well. And I got stuck in Longworth, a different building on a 5th floor, somewhere in a corner office. I have no idea where I was, but my staff met me there. And then when we were cleared to go back to our office building, we then again got stuck in a tunnel, this time in one of the underground tunnels in the Capitol. And probably about 100 other people were down there as well. And I was really grateful because I was sitting next to Dan Crenshaw, and I said, if I'm going to be in this situation, I definitely want to be next to a military veteran like Dan Crenshaw, who's a hero and will protect everybody in that hallway. And so I hung out with him for a little bit. And then when we were cleared to go back to our offices, that's when the Capitol doors were breached and we were all put in lockdown, and everyone in my staff, they were in the office at that point in time. We had the doors locked, lights out, shades drawn, and all you could hear were sirens because you had to be quiet. And for hours and hours on end, all we heard were sirens populating Capitol Hill in DC, trying to protect members of Congress and those that were at the Capitol.
You had enough worry that you wanted to send your kids away, but did you ever think you would see that level of political violence?
No, not ever. Not on our nation's capital. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't say, hey, this is the first time there's been violence. There hasn't. We had a riot in my congressional district back in May, and we've seen riots across the country. But to see this kind of violence, this rioting, this anarchy on our nation's capital, attacking our nation's capital, trying to find members of Congress. And you could hear, and I don't recommend anybody watch the videos, but you could hear in some of the videos, they're chanting, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. And all of this going on because of, and as some people call it the big lie, but there were actually multiple lies that were told after the election. The first of which was that Congress could miraculously overturn and overthrow the results of the Electoral College. Simply not true. That's not what the Constitution says you can do. But many people, including members of my own party, decided that they would follow the president's lead and that they would raise money off of that and take advantage of the hearts, minds, and wallets of voters. And say they're going to fight voter fraud. They raised over $500 million to fight voter fraud and really didn't spend any of that money to fight voter fraud. And the second lie that was told leading up to the 6th was that the vice president could overthrow the results of the Electoral College. The president saying this about Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence. And thank God for Vice President Mike Pence for standing up and saying, no, that's just not true. But that the rhetoric led to this violence, and it was so heartbreaking. And to see this in my 3rd day in office, I was sad, I was devastated, and I was pissed off, and I was really angry. One of the things I told my constituents was that when I got elected, I would not lie to them, and I would tell them the truth. And this was a crisis in our country. It was a constitutional crisis. It was a time and a place to not just stand idly by and be quiet and be a witness to this history, but to take a moment to speak up, speak out, tell the truth, and to try to help end what was going on.
And you have been speaking out. We should say you have been one of the most outspoken freshman members of Congress, for sure, among your Republican colleagues as well, who's been calling out even your own members of your party and saying you're disappointed in what they've done. And I just wonder what you would have to say about that right now, because there's supposed to be a sense of sort of party camaraderie, right? And that you have people that you forcefully disagree with who are ostensibly on the same side of the aisle as you. You guys are supposed to be seeing things the same way, and you're a world apart. What is that like right now in the party?
It's uncomfortable right now, and I've taken to task. There are members of my own party who are that are promulgating QAnon conspiracy theories, and I didn't really know what QAnon was. I've been asked about it and sort of laughed it off previously, but then after the 6th, I got online, I got on the internet, and I started looking at it, and I said, wow, this is really scary stuff. And there are people that we all consider hardworking, smart, successful Americans that believe this stuff, and it's hard for me to imagine. But when I saw what was going on after the violence that we all witnessed, to go back into the chamber, to allow our party to be led by QAnon conspiracy politicians, theorists, whatever you want to call them, and continue to object to the Electoral College after that kind of violence, after 5 people died. I had to walk through a crime scene where that woman was shot to get into the chamber that night. to me, it was indefensible, and it really made me angry because it is not a reflection. It's not a reflection of who I am, and it's not a reflection of our American values. And I disagree with Democrats and Republicans alike, but this time this was on us. And if we don't want to acknowledge that we have a problem in this country with division, divisive language, rhetoric, we're never going to be able to earn the trust of the American people back. And the first thing we've got to do is acknowledge we have a problem. And the second thing that we need to do is take responsibility for that problem. I mean, every single person that contributed to this, that created that kind of rhetoric, created that kind of environment to allow this violence to happen, they need to be held accountable, and we as a party need to take responsibility for it. And the more I learn about the events of that day, the worse it gets. And then the third thing that we really need to do is we need to stop being part of the problem and start being part of the solution. And this is where I call to task every single elected member of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, because we have seen violence in cities across the country for the last 9 months. There are fringes of both parties that spout off rhetoric that may encourage this kind of behavior, this kind of violence. And we don't want to cloud over Joe Biden's swearing in. We need to have a peaceful transition of power. This is a moment in time where we've got to come together and we need to work together. And I'm going to work very hard, more than ever now, to try to find ways to do that. It's not going to be easy because philosophically, I have many disagreements with Democrats and vice versa. But already I'm putting together a list of policies where I can cross over, where ideologically I can find some common ground with other Democrats. And one of the silver linings, I believe, of me being so strong and speaking out about this issue and us needing to take responsibility for it is that I've heard from Republicans and Democrats alike who are very supportive of the comments that I've made. And I believe there will be an effort, there will be a group of folks who really, truly want to make this country a better place. And we want to lay down the swords and start working together. And that's what I'm going to be all about in the days, weeks, and months to come.
You've said this one word, accountable, a lot, and calling for accountability. And a lot of people will say, before we can start to work together on all these things that we know we need to work together on, because the country is facing multiple crises right now, we have to be accountable for what has happened, for this historic level of political violence that we just all witnessed on the nation's capital. What does that look like for you? What does accountability mean, especially when you're talking about some of the members of your own party? What do you want to see happen?
I want to see everyone investigated to the fullest extent of the law from the top down, including members of my own party. One of the things that was very disturbing that I read about, allegedly, there was a member of Congress that was live tweeting the location of the Speaker of the House. I disagree with Nancy Pelosi on a number of things, philosophically, ideologically, but that is just totally inappropriate behavior. Those things that need to be investigated. The people that were speaking at the rally inciting this violence. I mean, if you read the transcripts or watch the speeches, then you kind of understand what was going on in the environment that was created that day. And I have had someone threaten to shoot me on social media. I mean, people need to be investigated. They need to be held accountable, and we can't sit in denial in this country and continue to be divisive. I was just really disappointed in seeing us continue to sow the seeds of division even after this violence. And I've been very vocal internally in my own Republican conference. And so I will continue to do so because I'm a single mom. I have 2 kids, and my country and my kids are worth saving. And even if it's to my detriment, I want to do everything I can to be a voice of reason, to be a voice of accountability, and hold everyone accountable. Impeachment was one way that some people wanted to hold the president accountable, but that effort by and large was more partisan than nonpartisan and took away due process because we avoided the Judiciary Committee, et cetera. But behind the scenes, what many people don't know is that there was an effort between Republicans and Democrats for censure. And it was a bipartisan, bicameral effort, meaning it was in both chambers, the US Senate and the US House. And there were multiple drafts, one included being almost identical to the articles of impeachment. So 1, holding the president accountable, and 2, prohibiting him from holding office again. And so, but unfortunately, we were unable to have that debate, couldn't even bring it up for a vote. And so the partisanship that it still continues at various levels, but there are Republicans and Democrats that are willing to take a stand, to be strong, and to do what's right for our country. And that's the group. Those are the people I want to be with, because that's the right side of history.
You mentioned that you yourself have faced some threats.
Mhm.
And I ask you this because I've heard it from some other members of your caucus, which is that they were worried about voting for impeachment because of potential blowback, because of the potential threat it could mean for them.
Yeah, I
Is
didn't
that
vote.
part of your concern?
Yeah, no, that was not part of my concern on the vote for impeachment because I was already in a mess to begin with. I had already been
What do you mean by that, in a mess?
well in I'd already been threatened. So when I came out publicly about my vote to certify the electoral college, that's when it really ratcheted up for me. I had been receiving threats before then, and then when I confirmed publicly a week before the vote that I was going to vote to certify the electoral college, it got even worse. So for at least 10 days previous to the vote on impeachment, I'd been getting hammered. I still am. And social media can be a wonderful thing to share great news, but also it can be hell. And I've been seeing the fruit of that for 2 weeks now. So that didn't factor into my vote. I'm a constitutional conservative. And so the Constitution is my guiding principle, even when the votes are hard. And the vote to certify the Electoral College is one of the most consequential votes of my lifetime. And I know that it will be, but I'd already made that decision because I knew what the Constitution said was my duty to do. And I swore a solemn oath to that.
You mentioned some of the policies and some of the legislative activity you want to focus on moving forward. I think it bears repeating for a lot of people. Some of the things I've heard from other members of Congress, which is that the divisions run so deep right now, and there's real fear among
There is.
members, sometimes of each other too. And I don't just mean Democrats and Republicans. Within the Republican caucus, one of the members actually described it to me as the most poisonous it's ever been. How do you actually do the work of meeting, of legislating, of negotiating, of working together when you've got some members of Congress who are actually scared other members of Congress could be a threat to them? How do you do that?
I've never seen anything like it. I mean, honest to God, I've never seen this kind of partisanship. I come from a state legislature where Republicans are the majority, but we don't operate this way. Republicans and Democrats actually get together. We debate. That's part of the American experiment. But what we're finding now is some of these very few but very loud voices are trying to silence dissent. They're trying to silence debate. And I see it within my own party as well. And that's un-American. Part of the American way of life, part of the American experiment is the opportunity to be able to debate ideas, ideology, policies, positions, and not be attacked, to not be silenced. And so that's one of the reasons I've just been so vocal, because I'm not going to tolerate that. This is not the country I want to raise my children in. We are much better than this, and we need leadership more than ever before. And I'm going to continue to be a very strong voice, no matter the consequence.
Can I ask you, though, you mentioned not wanting to be silenced. We've heard some of the same arguments, for example, from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has espoused QAnon conspiracy theories, or from Lauren Boebert, who, as you mentioned, was the one tweeting the speaker's location on the day of the attack. That's the same argument we've heard from them about not wanting to be silenced. So how do you move past that? How do you find common ground on legislation, which is what the people need right now?
Well, I think it'll be until and I'm a big believer in Reagan's 11th commandment, so I'm not going to mention anyone by name, but those who do believe and espouse the philosophies of QAnon, they really have no place in our body. And I think it'll be very difficult to work with those folks who many of us believe some of their rhetoric helped encourage what happened. These are the most difficult times I've ever seen as a lawmaker. And so my focus is going to be with my colleagues who are willing to raise their hand and step into the arena and have a reasonable and sound mind and body to find ways that we can genuinely do what's best for our country. Because a lot of what I see, and I see it on both parties, in the fringes of both parties, we have folks within our body that are just here. They don't legislate. They just get on the media and they do their interviews. They raise money. They write books, and they really are not effective within our chamber. And I am not going to be that way. I want to be an effective member of Congress. I want to be able to work with people so that we can get things done. Between COVID-19 and the government shutting us down and people being out of work, healthcare is an enormous problem. Getting small businesses back to work and keeping their doors open. I mean, that is the business of the people. And that's what I came here to do. And that's where my focus is going to be throughout my tenure in Congress.
Well, people certainly need your help. And we're so grateful to you for making the time to talk today.
And thank you.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace from South Carolina. Thank you so much. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amna, and thank you, Congresswoman, for that fantastic discussion. It's fascinating to get this kind of inside look. So, what does it really take to get women elected to Congress? Years of hard work and an ecosystem of supporters, PACs, and commitment to ensuring women have the resources and the tools they need to run and win. All In Together is proud to have partnered with a number of amazing organizations for this program, including 131 and Counting, Right Now Women PAC, and the newly established Women's Campaign School at the LBJ School. Joining us now are Ariel Judah, co-chair of Right Now Women PAC, Ashley Davis, board member of Winning for Women, Amy Kroll, founder and executive director of the LBJ Women's Campaign School, and Robin Patterson, national press secretary for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They will be speaking with Bloomberg Government's congressional reporter, Emily Wilkins. Please join me in welcoming them. Emily, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Welcome to our panel today. Joining me, we have four amazing women as part of this panel. Ashley Davis with Winning for Women, Ariel Judah with Right Now Women PAC, Robin Patterson with the DCCC, and Amy Kroll with the LBJ Women's Campaign School. So we'll kick things right off with just a question about how attracting and raising money for women candidates has changed in the last several cycles.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. This is Ashley Davis representing Winning for Women. I think that at least on the Republican side, I don't want to speak on the Democrat side, but women always had a little bit harder of ability to raise money than men. And I think it was because we're not just as good as asking for it. And so one of the things that we have done over the last 2 years as we've been recruiting candidates, women candidates to run for office, is really helping to train them how to ask for money, how to do fundraising. But we've also been supporting them through super PACs or supporting them through traditional fundraising to try to make sure that they are at the same level as their other candidates, but as well as men.
Just building off of your point about the fundraising gap, Ashley, is there was a study that came out in the 2018 cycle that showed that specifically women who were running for Congress, and today we're celebrating the women of the 117th Congress. So specifically women who are running for Congress in the 2020 cycle in the 67 most competitive House races. This study found that women were actually raising about $500,000 less in these congressional races as compared to their male counterparts. But what I think is so impressive about the women who ran and won in 2018 and ran and won in 2020 is that despite these this massive financial gender gap, these women were running and winning at the same rates as men. So when women actually do run, they're winning at the same rates as men, which just shows how phenomenal of candidates these women in the 117th Congress truly are.
And I think what you're seeing on the Democratic side is both women raising amounts that are comparable to men because of the investment groups like Emily's List, whose job is to go in early, to help women get campaigns off the ground, to connect them with donors, and to really do the work to make sure that our candidates are very diverse. But also Democrats have seen a lot of money come in through the grassroots, through online donations. And some of our best fundraisers are women who really excite voters. You look at someone like a Katie Porter, who is possibly one of the best fundraisers in the Democratic Party, House or Senate, and someone who is well known because she's a great advocate for consumers, very passionate, gets a lot of these grassroots donors, gets people excited. And we're seeing that with candidates across the board. Some of our best fundraising candidates this year were women, primarily because of how much they excited the base and how much they were able to bring in online.
on the Republican side, I think we learned lessons from 2018. We had a terrible cycle for Republican women in 2018. We only added one new Republican woman to the House. Now in 2020, we're experiencing the year of the Republican woman. And I think that has a lot to do with the leadership of Congresswoman Elise Stefanik stepping in and telling women, you don't have to wait your turn. I didn't wait my turn. She was the youngest female Republican member of Congress ever. And I think she offered stepping stones to public office for a lot of these Republican women candidates. She focused so hard, and her groups and other groups like Winning for Women, View PAC, and Right Now Women PAC focus on recruiting good candidates, supporting them early. And I think it really made a difference in the 2020 cycle.
And Ariel, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I actually wanted to see if you could get in a little bit as to what happened within the Republican Party that allowed women to make the gains that we saw this year. And Robin, if you want to jump in as well, I know that Democratic women had a huge year in 2018. What changes were made within both of those parties to pull off these wins?
Well, I think that, Elise Stefanik really led the way, but then she got leadership on board. And I think moving forward, we're going to have even more momentum, because in this past cycle, we showed leadership. Having more Republican women candidates on the ballot is good for our party. It's not some exercise in identity politics. This allows our party to win, to expand the coalitions, and to grow and hopefully have a House majority in the next cycle. I think, success, the results speak for themselves, basically. The more success we have, the more success we're going to have recruiting Republican women candidates to run, and we're going to keep growing our numbers.
And as you mentioned, Emily, 2018 was a great year for Democratic women, but every seat Democrats flipped in 2020 was flipped by a woman candidate. We defended 66% plus of the districts that we held that are won by Trump in 2018 and 2020. And those are won by women like Lauren Underwood, Katie Porter, Lizzie Fletcher, folks across the board who the Democratic Party has realized are really stars and great public servants. And we've made a commitment at the DCCC to elect more women, to elect more diverse women, and to really get engaged early in these campaigns, but also once they get to Congress to defend them. These are some of the races: Lauren Underwood's race in Illinois, Haley Stevens' race in Michigan, where the DCCC invested very heavily in order to ensure that they can win in districts where Trump ultimately carried.
And both of you touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to see if you could dig even a little bit deeper on it. I mean, how much of this change is coming about because of leadership within the parties deciding this is something that needs to happen? And how much is coming about simply because there are women who raise their hands and say, hey, I'm willing to run and I'm interested in having a campaign?
I think what Robin said, it was exactly what we came up with on the Republican side. They had such a success story in 2018. I think that it inspired so many women on the Republican side to run because of all the great strides that they had on the Democrat side and saw what happened. And I really give a lot of our success to what happened in 2018 on the Democrat side because of inspiring those members. I also think, and Robin, that's very interesting. I didn't realize that all the seats that flipped were with women on the Democrat side this time. That's a great stat to know. But I also think that in regards to leadership, that the organizations that were created, because we never had an Emily's List or Planned Parenthood that would support a lot of our candidates. And so that's why I think organically some of these groups, such as Winning for Women and others, were created. But I think that these groups that are still in existence were the ones that really invested early recruiting candidates and also supporting them at the beginning when there was a crowded primary field. But also I do have to give credit to the NRCC and Susan Brooks and others that did try to go after the Republican. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me that over half of this country are women, and we're still fighting for it. But I'm very happy that we did make as many gains as we did, but we have a long way to go. And
I think on our side, it was both grassroots and leadership. our speaker, the Speaker of the House, leader of our House Democrats, is obviously Nancy Pelosi. The chair of the DCCC was Sherry Bustos. But also our party relies upon women to win elections. The gender gap is how Democrats get elected. And women's backlash against the president on healthcare reform, on reproductive right issues are why Democrats won the House in 2018 and why we protected it, which is why I think you saw a lot of voters demand that we really get behind and elect women because they're the ones who are behind a lot of our success.
I also want to ask not just about making sure that we elect women, but making sure that we elect a diversity of women. Robin, I know this was something that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, I realized I've been using the DTRIP acronym the entire time, but that is the full title for our listeners. They had a lot of focus last time on making sure that they had wide diversity among candidates, not just women, but racial minorities as well. And I was just wondering if you and our other panelists can talk a bit about the importance of making sure that that diversity is there.
Yeah, and I'll be quick, but like we see it as necessary to win races. We need to have a party and candidates that look like the country and that districts feel represent them. And so we made great strides, particularly this year, in getting behind women who are AAPI, Latina, African American, who look like their districts, but also just look like America. And it is something you have to be intentional about in order to ensure that you have a list that looks like the way it should and the way our party should look. I think it's something you're going to continue to see from Democrats.
And I just wanted to add to that in addition to all the incredible work of the panelists on this call, there's a whole ecosystem of women's organizations that are really committed to ensuring that we have a diverse bench of women who are going to be moving up into these roles, into these congressional roles. Organizations, of course, like ours at the LBJ Women's Campaign School, we're really proud of the diversity of our class, which is a majority women of color class, but also ranges in age from 23 to 60 and from states across the country, from rural and urban areas. But there are, of course, a number of organizations that are really focused on increasing the diversity in our government. I'm thinking about Higher Heights, Latinas Represent, Victory Institute. There's a whole ecosystem of organizations working to make sure that we have not just women, but a diverse cohort of women entering our government, because this is more urgent than ever, right? We are in this period of national crisis, a global pandemic, and right now, more than ever, we need a government that's going to be responsive to the people and truly representative of the people. And I'm really proud to be part of this movement of organizations that is lifting up women and especially diverse women in politics.
And Amy, I'm so glad you brought that up because I actually did want to ask you a little bit about the LBJ Women's Campaign School. You're about to graduate your first class of future candidates. Where do you see the future of women in politics going?
Yes, well, absolutely. The future of women in politics is going towards that 50% mark that we are all working so hard to get to, that gender parity in politics. And some state legislatures have actually already reached that. Nevada's state legislature, for example, is already 50% women. And we saw a few other legislative bodies across the country, Rhode Island, New Mexico, Oregon, and Colorado, all reach that 50% mark. So that is absolutely the future of women in politics. But what I've seen from our first class of 50 women, they applied to this program during this time of national crisis, this global pandemic. And rather than sitting on the sidelines or being fearful about what it would mean to enter government at a time when citizens are demanding so much of our government, they're saying, I am here ready to serve my community. They are saying, put me in, coach. They are inspired by what needs to be done in our community. So I think as we're looking towards 2021 in the municipal elections, 2022, 2023, we are going to see women who were activated by seeing a government in crisis and thinking, I am here, I want to do more for my community, and truly are stepping up into those roles in local office and school boards, city councils, state legislatures, and beyond.
And if any of our other panelists have thoughts about what the future of women in politics looks like, especially after the big years that we've seen for women in 2020 and 2018.
Well, to Amy's point, the really exciting thing for Republican women and electing so many new members to Congress is that, we've got these qualified women in office now, and they're going to be the future pool that we draw from for future presidents' cabinet positions and eventually our first female president. So the more women that we get in there elected, it's going to get better and better. There's role models in government now. There's lots of role models of women that are doing both. They're balancing having a family and being in public office. I think seeing more and more of those role models is going to inspire a lot of women that are kind of hesitant about running for public office to, throw their hat in the race.
Absolutely. I just would love to add on to that. If we think about where we came from, right? This question is about the future of women in politics. But if we think about where we came from, that 100 years ago, women didn't even have the right to vote, that now we're looking at almost 30% of women in Congress. I think Ariel's making a great point about how we are building the bench. And there's a great question about when are we going to reach that 50% mark? And I think that it's going to be faster, right? It took us 100 years to get to 30%. But my hope is that because of all the work of people on this call, because of women stepping up, it's not going to take us 100 years to get to the next 20%. It's going to move a lot faster because these women are inspiring one another as they're reaching these leadership roles.
I would also say that no matter what political party that you are in, I know as a Republican that I am very proud of the fact that Kamala Harris is going to be the first woman vice president of this country, a diverse candidate. And, I think every woman in America should be proud of that, whether you believe in what exactly their political points or not. And I think that's something huge that we all can't forget about.
I want to dig a little bit as well, sort of into the strategy behind the campaigns here for a minute. I mean, when it comes to electing women, can you guys talk a little bit about what the playbook is? Are there things that work for women or don't work for men, vice versa? Are there things they need to keep in mind with their messaging or who they're trying to message to?
I think for us, the most powerful thing and the most helpful thing when getting someone elected is a candidate's personal story. That is true whether they are men or they are women. And the women that we've gotten elected over the past several cycles are people with incredibly powerful stories. You take someone like Lucy McBath, who lost her son to gun violence and has been a gun violence advocate. And it's that story that empowered her and inspired her to get involved in public service, and is why she ran for office. You take someone like Lauren Underwood, who is a diabetic, who worked in the Obama administration HHS, who ran for Congress because of attempts to repeal the ACA. And they're people with very powerful personal narratives about why they got involved. And that's what resonates with voters. Male, female, Black, white, Latino, Latina. Voters want someone who they can relate to, who they believe is passionate, wants to protect their community. And so we ask our folks to tell us why they're running. And generally that is the best message with voters.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Robin. In our curriculum, the very first day of our curriculum is about storytelling and is about tapping into who you are, why you're running, what issues you care about. And this is a theme throughout our entire course where the women in our cohort make a capstone video where they tell their personal story and they share that with one another and have that practice telling their personal story. But it's truly about tapping into who you are, why you're running, and how you want to serve your community. And I think Robin's right on the money with that answer. Yes.
I agree. Personal stories are so important. We saw some of the Republican women rising stars that were able to flip those seats this past cycle. Nicole Malliotakis, she's of Cuban descent, and she was able to speak to that anti-socialism message. So was Maria Salazar in Florida. I think these personal stories, you can't underestimate them. They're really what allows us to connect with voters.
We have just a couple minutes left, but I wanted to see if you guys could talk a little bit about what your advice is to the audience today and to the women who are listening to this. What suggestions would you have if they want to run for office, if they want to get more involved in the political process? What suggestions do you have for them?
I'll take this one first. I love this question. Thank you so much, Emily. My advice to the women on this call who want to support other women in their community, think about that one woman in your life who you think she would make an incredible public voice for our community, and tell her that. Share with her that you think that she would do an incredible job as a public servant, and then take the next step and connect her to resources where she can start her political journey. Resources like the LBJ Women's Campaign School or others on this call, and really urge her to step into the political arena. But beyond that, if you are ready to get involved, make sure that you are connecting to these organizations and finding other ways to get involved in your community, such as attending a virtual government meeting, reading your local newspaper, writing an op-ed, volunteering, and donating. There's so many different ways that you can get involved and help support women candidates in your community.
My big joke is always, and Amy, I totally agree with everything you said. My big joke is always that men always feel like they were born to run for office and women always have to be asked. And so I think that if you're watching this today and have an interest, or exactly what Amy said, that you know somebody, to encourage them to run and to support them, and you almost maybe have to hold their hand to get them to the point of actually running. But if it's you that has an interest as well, I just think it's so important. And there's now the resources, and especially on the Republican side, the Democrats have a lot of resources, but the Republicans are building their resources up to be able to support these women.
Excellent. Well, to our panelists, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. This is a really fascinating discussion. I wish it could go on for another 20 minutes, but thank you all again so much. And Lauren, back to you.
Thank you all so much for your contribution to this discussion and to your tireless work to elect women. We are pleased to be able to offer this program free of charge, thanks to the support and underwriting from our sponsors. For a word on their commitment to supporting gender equity and programs like this, please welcome Deborah Liu, Facebook's Vice President for Marketplace.
Hello, I'm Deb Liu. I'm the Vice President of Facebook App Commerce. And I want to congratulate all of the members of Congress on being elected to the 117th Congress. It is my great honor to address all of you virtually. And I want to highlight that this is a historic achievement. Record numbers of women have run for office and won on both sides of the aisle in 2020. And Americans elected the first woman vice president. And in congressional and state races across America, women broke barriers and pushed through limits in new ways. Facebook applauds All In Together for the work that they do to empower and mobilize women across the political spectrum and across this country so that they can become advocates and leaders for the issues they care about. This representation not only is necessary at the highest levels of our government, but also at leadership at places of work and within our communities. At Facebook, I am proud that 37% of our roles are held by women and 34% of our leadership roles. But we still have a long way to go. Facebook supports the goals of equity and inclusion, but we also are a platform where women in their community can organize and help one another every single day. Just one example, an inspiring example from 2020, when our frontline workers lacked PPE, personal protective equipment, when they didn't have masks, women from across the country started sewing together to create personal protective equipment for those in their local hospitals and clinics. This reminds me of the power women have to change their communities and change our country. And that steadfast leadership is what empowers us to have a stronger community. Facebook is pleased to support All In Together in this important event at such a critical time for our country. The work of organizations like this and the representation of women in the 117th Congress is more important now than ever before. There's a lot of work left to do, and Facebook stands with all of you in uplifting, empowering, and supporting women in our communities so that we can all reach our full potential.
Women have made great progress, but we do have more work to do.
I would like every American voter to really understand how her vote matters to the outcomes that she wants for her life, for her children.
When you're the first, as the women on this call can tell you, sometimes you have to blaze a path where there wasn't one before. I have to do things differently. My way is not necessarily the same as the guys that came before me.
In this moment, it is so critical that we center the humanity and dignity of people and that we ensure that those closest to the pain are driving and informing the policy making.
One of the most important roles that women elected officials can play is making sure that the perspective of women is represented across all policy issues.
You have 51% of the population becoming more vocal, stronger advocates for the things they want, regardless of what they are, you're going to have very different outcomes. And that's why I think the call to action is the most important thing we can create.
At this time in our country, to find a way for us all to come together around the value of civic engagement rather than the value of partisan divides. I think it is what we need now more than ever.
You have to figure out what is in the realm of the possible and then build support and consensus in a bipartisan and a bicameral way. And I think in this new Congress, it's going to be even more important.
I do believe that there's nothing more wholesome or more important to governance and politics in our country than the increased participation of women.
You just go on and do your thing and bring more women along, because it's not just about myself and the women serving, but it's about breaking those barriers and breaking that glass ceiling so that other women can come behind you.
All In Together is proud of our relationships with dedicated lawmakers from both sides of the aisle who've supported our programs over the years. Despite the challenging political moment, we're committed to fostering respectful, open, and thought-provoking dialogue and to inspiring women to lead. Our work will continue as the peaceful, constructive participation of women in our democracy remains vital as ever. Now to our keynote conversation. The United States Senate was in full session when a violent mob stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Miraculously, none of our elected leaders were harmed, even as many others were hurt and even died. Senator Debbie Stabenow, who became Michigan's first female U.S. Senator when she was elected in 2000, was in the Senate chamber that day. She speaks now with our friend, CNN's Dana Bash, about that terrible day and how the now 50-50 Senate can get things done and bring the country together going forward. Please join me in welcoming Dana Bash and Senator Debbie Stabenow.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm really honored to be here, and I want to thank you, Senator Stabenow, for joining me to have a discussion. And anybody watching this will be dying to know what you have to say on so many topics. I know I am. I can't wait to have a conversation with you. And I do want to talk about what's next and about how the Senate and the country everybody's going to come together, and I want to do it through the prism of women, which is what All In Together is all about, and it does tremendous work on trying to do just that. I mean, it tries to live up to its name, All In Together, in a bipartisan way. But first, I have to ask you about Wednesday, January 6th. What was it like in that moment when you were told to leave, to evacuate? Walk us through those minutes if you can.
Well, first, Dan, it's always wonderful to be with you, and I'm so grateful for this wonderful organization that is really trying to bring folks together. I mean, that is the goal, right, out of all of this. The divide and what's behind it in terms of those who with actually very malicious intent has become very clear, but it means we even more have to be working together to try to get beyond this. And I believe, as always, that it will be women leading the way. So on Wednesday, we didn't realize the full extent of what was happening because we were in the Senate chambers debating whether or not Arizona's certified vote should be, it overturned. And so it was only just before the vice president was taken out of the room that we started getting texts that people were in the building. And I got a text, "Are you okay?" And was like, "Well, from what?" And then suddenly, everything broke loose here, locking the doors, the Capitol Police screaming, "Lock the doors, lock the doors, lock the doors, stay at your desk," and so on. A few minutes later, we were taken out the back way, downstairs through the basement over to one of the office buildings, and still not knowing exactly where we were going or what was going on. And we didn't fully understand the extent of what was happening and how close we were to very serious violence coming our way in the Senate until we got to the location where they were taking us, and they turned on the television sets. And we could see what was happening, the scaling of the Capitol wall and so on. It looked like something out of a movie. It was frightening, horrifying, and heartbreaking. I mean, I think I had these conflicting feelings because unlike 9/11, this wasn't foreign terrorists attacking the World Trade Center. These were Americans and people who were, essentially leading an insurrection at the Capitol of the United States of America, taking down the American flag, putting up the flag of a person. It doesn't matter whose name was on the flag. That's not who we are. We're not a dictatorship. We don't put up the flag of the leader. We put up the flag of the United States of America. So we have a lot of work to do. And I think the most important thing is that we went back when this was done. We decided we had to show the world and people in this country that we still had a functioning democracy, and that we were going to complete our work under the Constitution, which we did, and that we were not going to be coward at this point. And so we just got to go forward and make sure people are safe from COVID, safe from any violent threats. We got to get people back to work, children back to school. There's a lot to do. And as I said before, I really truly believe that when it comes to bipartisanship, that it will be women leading the way in the House and the Senate.
Which has certainly been the case for so long. And your ranks are growing. And, that's always a good thing. And it's happening in a bipartisan way. This organization is called All In Together. And the question is, and I don't know if you have the answer, gosh, I hope you have an answer. I don't have an answer to this. And that is about misinformation. How do you get people together? How do you get people on the same page when they don't believe the same set of facts? And in this case, they've been fed a bunch of lies from somebody who is as powerful as the president of the United States. And that has been enabled by some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
Right. Dana, this is one of the big questions, and it's going to take time to turn this around, as well as some important decisions and accountability. I mean, the fact is that when I talk with folks in Michigan who have believed that Donald Trump won the election and that this election was stolen, and that, the QAnon theory that we're all a bunch of child molesters and pedophiles, and Donald Trump, is the person ordained by God to be able to take back the country. I mean, there's a whole—
These are real conversations that you have. I mean, this is important for people to hear. You're talking to your constituents, and you're trying to reason with them, and this is what you hear back.
Yes. And they truly believe it. And that goes to the challenge of where do they get their information? Because we don't have anymore a common news source where everybody's tuning in for the 6 o'clock news and hearing the same thing, right? I mean, we have a whole range of platforms and some underground and, social media up until very, very recently, no accountability going on, which I think is really shameful. It raises questions about, how we get information, what that information is. And we're now at a point where we see what many of us have said for a long time, that this is very, very dangerous. These aren't words. People are believing this and being excited and incited. They think they're being the patriots, you know, and also being used, by the way, being used by other countries, Russia at the top of the list, and others who love what they are seeing. You know, they don't have the military budget and the military might to take out the United States of America, but using all of the misinformation around social media and all of the ways to divide us, you know, they're trying to take us out from within. And they've been doing a pretty good job of dividing people. And this is not an accident. This is not an accident. And so, so somehow we've got to get the majority of people, and some people we will not reach, we just won't. But the majority of people have to be willing to say, you and I may passionately disagree on an issue. You are not my enemy. We just have differences in views, and we can debate that all day about how do you create jobs and how do you tackle COVID and what the educational system should look like and so on. But we fundamentally are Americans and have some basic sense of trust. What has happened is there are no guardrails, no sense of trust, no limits. This president basically will destroy anybody and anything for his own ego, his own emotions, his own instability, his own purposes. And there are people behind him who see this as a great way to divide and take down America. So we're not gonna let that happen. We're not gonna let that happen. But we have to understand that there are people who are trying to make that happen and understand that it's serious. And then we're gonna come together and we're swearing in at inaugural a new president and vice president who have more on their shoulders and in their lap than anyone I can think of, maybe since the Great Depression with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, but maybe more. I don't know. It's a huge job, and we're going to have to be patient with them. We're going to have to be willing to sacrifice together and work together and figure out some way to trust each other going forward.
Yeah.
Because I believe in our country. I believe in the United States of America. I believe in the American dream. And I would say one other thing, Dan, and that is, I think some of the best ways we can begin to rebuild trust is actually helping people, getting things done, helping people get the vaccines, get through the pandemic, get their business open, get the schools open, have them see that people do care about them and that they can get their lives back.
Yeah, make their lives better. I mean, maybe this is an unfair analogy, but it's the first thing that came to my mind is, you know, post World War I, the reason why the United States and the Allies screwed up so badly is because there was no help to get people's lives back, and they turned to lies and propaganda. And that should be a lesson for everybody, even in this country. I have to ask real quick, I don't want to dwell on this. I want to talk more big picture, but do you think impeachment is the answer, or are you listening to some of your Republican colleagues who are saying, well, if we do that, we're just going to end up with more division and we're going to make the president a martyr, and it's the wrong way to go?
I think crimes were committed and there has to be accountability, and we'll have to figure out all of what that means. But we can't just say there was an insurrection, people died, the Capitol building, in some areas you had terrific damage, and oh well, let's just go on, it's another day. No, it's not just another day. So there will be accountability. We'll have to figure out the smartest, most responsible way to do that. But we have to have accountability while we build our country back. We have to focus on both.
And let's talk about the way forward. 50-50 Senate. It does mean that you and your party will be in charge, and you'll set the agenda, but will not have a lot of wiggle room, as you well know, right, with regard to the votes. How do you see that playing out? I mean, I know that you obviously are a member of the Democratic leadership, but you, like a lot of Democrats, have real relationships across the aisle, and that is correct me if I'm wrong, but largely thanks to the fact that you and other women in the Republican and Democratic Party get together and make an effort to do so.
Well, we do get together, as you know. Up until COVID happened, we were getting together about once a month for dinner to just have a chance to talk to each other. You know, a lot of things just related to family and community and how we were feeling, but also our frustrations and, you know, how we wanted to work together, what we cared about, and so on. And it's still something that we as women understand is important. That's building trust, even if you disagree. We do have to work together. In fact, the reality is you never get anything done unless you work together. You know, I've led the effort on a 5-year farm bill, which is the food, rural community, and farm policy for our country. And it's done every 5 years. It's very big, complicated effort, and we never get it done, no matter who's in charge, unless we work across the aisle. So I have those relationships, done the same thing on community mental health. We're doing new behavioral health centers in the community. Roy Blunt and I have led that. Susan Collins and Senator Capito and I are leading efforts that we just got done on Alzheimer's and support for caregivers, which is so important. Lisa Murkowski and I have led efforts on supply chain issues around the food system and access to food that we just got in the COVID package. I could go on and on and on. So I have to say, for my side of the aisle, who really believes in governing, it's a different view. I mean, we believe that government needs to have people's back in situations where they're challenged like this in their lives or livelihood, and we believe in governing. And so I think the vast majority of our members understand and work across the aisle all the time, or at least they want to. And so this will put us in a position to be able to address the tone in a much more specific way. There will be 4 women chairing committees, and at least 2 women, 2 Republicans now being the ranking members, the lead Republicans on committees. So we will, and not only am I in leadership, and we have women in leadership, but we will have women chairing committees, setting the tone and creating the priorities.
That's no small thing, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, the men, with some exceptions, aren't good leaders, but there is a difference, right? When a woman when a woman is the chair and the woman is setting the tone, it feels different.
It does feel different, and it really is more inclusive. For instance, when I write a farm bill, I make sure that every member of the committee on both sides of the aisle has things in there that are very important to them. I tend to divide up the policy into separate bills so people can have their names on bills and be able to tell their constituents what they were able to accomplish. So it's a different strategy. So many times in my life, I have to say, and sometimes my friends and my staff say, I shouldn't do this because it takes away people being aware of what I've done. But I have found if you're willing to give up the credit, let somebody else put their name on the bill, and then you write the bill and negotiate it, you get a lot more done. You know, when I led the effort to help Flint and what happened in the water crisis, my name's not on that. You know, we ended up folding that into the water resources bill. I worked with Senator Inhofe on that, and we got it done, and you're not going to see my name on that. But we helped people and got it done, which was the most important thing to me.
Very female. Last question, since this is about All In Together and it's, you know, about what people can do. What is your advice to regular, everyday, average Americans watching what's happening in Washington, but maybe having some hope that maybe that there's a new day dawning, how they can help to bring that along?
First of all, don't give up. Don't become so cynical that you give up on our country or on this process of democracy. It only works when we're engaged. You know, the famous quote, democracy is not a spectator sport. And that certainly is true. We need to be talking not only to people that agree with us, but listening to those who don't, and where we can, try to find some way to talk to people. and acknowledge differences. I also think it's a time right now we have to act. We have to be as bold and responsible in doing that as we can, because we have big problems and we need support. So we need to have voices that are saying to us, get a COVID package done, do what we need to do to support our teachers and children and open up the schools. Let's do a clean energy package that focuses on the climate crisis and creates jobs and make sure everybody's got the vaccine that wants to have that, so we can protect ourselves. Let's tackle racial injustice. And certainly it was on full display on Wednesday, by the way, in terms of racial inequities. And so we need people to help us and be encouraging us to be responsible, but bold. And tackle the things that need to get done, so people can have some confidence that our government, our democracy actually works for them. I think that's really important right now.
Very well said. A good place to leave this. Senator Stabenow, so good to see you, even if it's virtually. Stay well and stay safe, and thank you.
Thanks so much.
Lauren, back to you.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you, Senator, for spending time with us this evening. We're hugely grateful for your time. Thank you all for joining us for this amazing program. We hope you've learned something and come away hopeful for the future and inspired to engage constructively in our political process. Throughout 2021, AIT will be offering extraordinary programs like this one with many more amazing women. Be sure to register for our upcoming programs and follow AIT on social media. In February, we'll be looking at the intersections of women's leadership and economic equality in our Women in Financial Services Equity Forum. In March, we'll meet and hear from the incredible women scientists leading COVID vaccine development and delivery, and explore how women are leading the fight for health equity in our Women in Healthcare Equity Forum. And finally, in April, don't miss our second Black Women Lead Forum, highlighting exceptional Black women leaders across America, leading the fight for progress in business, politics, media, and the arts. We are proud of the inclusive, mobilizing work we do at All In Together. If you're interested in doing more to advance women's political leadership in your community, stay connected to our programs and trainings. There are many ways to lead, and AIT is committed to ensuring women have the tools and resources they need to make an impact. Thank you once again to our sponsors, Facebook, Bloomberg Government, and InterDigital, our presenting partners, speakers, and to all of you. Good night.